Welcome to this second volume dedicated to the mysteries of biblical archaeology. This content was designed to provide a calm and enriching immersion, perfect for winding down. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let history guide you into a deep sleep. Enjoy the journey. Chapter 1. Before Israel, very ancient roots. Before Israel. Before Abraham. Before even the first biblical narratives were whispered around fires. Civilizations already existed. Kingdoms. Archives. Part 101. The royal archives of Ebla and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. At Tel Marduk in Syria, in the 1970s, Italian archaeologists led by Paolo Mattei discovered something extraordinary. A royal palace. With thousands of cuneiform tablets. The archives of Ebla, a flourishing city-state around 2500 BCE. Among these tablets, some mention city names that resonate familiarly: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, Zor. The 5 cities of the plain mentioned in Genesis. These mentions date to about 1,000 years before Abraham. They testify that these cities, whether destroyed by fire from heaven or not, truly existed in the geography and memory of the ancient Near East. The archives of Ebla remind us that the biblical world has its roots in very ancient historical realities, well before the narratives we know. Part 102. The Tablets of Ebla, an already bureaucratic world. These Ebla tablets are not simple lists of cities. They reveal a sophisticated society. Commercial contracts. Diplomatic treaties. Tax lists. Detailed administrative archives. A developed writing system, cuneiform, used to manage a complex state. Ebla maintained relations with Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia. It controlled trade routes, exported textiles, imported precious metals. And all this took place well before biblical Israel. Well before Moses. Well before the Torah was written. The Ebla tablets show that the world in which Israel would emerge was already literate, bureaucratic, organized, interconnected. Writing is not a biblical innovation. It is an inheritance. Part 103. Elliptical villages in the Highlands. Around 1200 to 1000 BCE, in the highlands of Canaan, the hills of Judea, Samaria, something new appears. Villages. Small. Composed of houses arranged in elliptical form, creating a protective enclosure in the center of which were animal pens. These sites are very different from the great Canaanite cities of the plains. No massive walls. No palaces. No writing. A simpler, more pastoral society. Many archaeologists associate these villages with the emergence of Israel. These would be the first Israelites groups who would gradually develop a distinct identity. The elliptical villages show us that Israel does not appear suddenly. It emerges slowly, modestly, in the hills, far from the great cities. A discreet birth. Part 104. These highland inhabitants were not simple nomads. They settled. They cultivated. Archaeologists have discovered agricultural terraces built on hillsides. Considerable work, testifying to a will to settle. They also found underground silos, large jars buried in the ground to store grain. These silos indicate surplus agricultural production, long-term planning. This organization suggests a stable, organized population, capable of transforming the landscape and ensuring its subsistence. The terraces and silos tell us the story of a community taking root, transforming the land, building a future. It is in this movement that Israel is born. Part 105. The absence of pig bones, an identity marker. A strange detail. In these highland sites, archaeologists noticed something striking. The almost total absence of pig bones. In Canaanite sites of the plains, pig bones are common. In Philistine coastal sites, they are frequent. But in the hill villages, almost nothing. Is it a food taboo? A voluntary distinction from neighbors? Some researchers see an early identity marker, a way to define oneself as different, as separate. A proto-kashrut. The absence of pig bones, banal as it may seem, could be one of the first signs of an Israelite identity in formation. An identity also built by what one does not eat. Chapter 2. Biblical cities with disputed locations. The Bible mentions hundreds of cities. Some have been identified with certainty. Others remain mysterious. And some are the subject of passionate debates. Part 106. Bethsaida, a fierce debate. Bethsaida, birthplace of Peter, Andrew, and Philip according to the Gospel of John. Place where Jesus performed several miracles. But where exactly was Bethsaida? For decades, two sites have disputed this title, Elliptical and El-Araj. Elliptical, located about 2 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee, was long the favorite candidate. Extensive excavations revealed an important Iron Age city. But a problem remained: Elliptical is too far from the lake. Yet the Gospels describe Bethsaida as a fishing town, on the water. Since 2017, excavations at El-Araj, directly on the northern shore of the lake, have revealed first-century structures of Byzantine church, Roman remains, evidence of fishing activity. El-Araj is becoming the strongest candidate for Bethsaida. But the debate is not closed. Archaeology progresses through trial, revision, discussion. Part 107. El-Araj, a prosperous fishing quarter. Excavations at El-Araj have revealed much more than a simple village. An entire quarter from the 1st to 3rd centuries CE. Well-built houses. Paved streets. Public baths. Fine ceramics. A Byzantine church built in the 5th century to commemorate the site as holy. Archaeologist Mordecai Avium and his team found evidence of a fishing-based economy, net weights, hooks, anchors. This Bethsaida was prosperous. It was not a poor hamlet. It was an active, commercial, lively city. El-Araj reminds us that the world of Jesus was not rural and backward. It was an urban, dynamic, connected world. Part 108. Geographic Criteria Around the Lake. How to identify an ancient city. Archaeologists use several criteria. Toponymy. Does the modern place name resemble the ancient name? Geography. Does the site match ancient descriptions? Archaeology. Do we find remains from the right period? For Bethsaida, geographic criteria are crucial. Luke's Gospel mentions that Jesus withdrew toward a city called Bethsaida. John specifies that Bethsaida was of Galilee. El-Araj is exactly where one would expect Bethsaida, by the lake, in the Galilean zone, near Capernaum. Geographic criteria, combined with archaeological discoveries, make El-Araj increasingly convincing. But archaeology never offers absolute certainty. Part 109. Gibeah of Saul, a questioned identification. Gibeah. Birthplace of King Saul. First king of Israel. Where Samuel anointed him. For a long time, archaeologists identified Gibeah with Tel El-Ful, a site a few kilometers north of Jerusalem. William F. Albright conducted excavations there in the 1920s and discovered a fortress he attributed to Saul. The identification seemed solid. But recent reassessments have sown doubt. The dating of the fortress is uncertain. Occupation levels do not correspond perfectly to Saul's time. Some researchers now propose other sites. Others suggest that Gibeah and Gibeah, two similar names, were confused in biblical texts. The identification of Gibeah is no longer so certain. What seemed obvious becomes uncertain. Archaeology is a work of constant revision. Part 110. Identification rests on fragile evidence. Identifying an ancient city is a delicate exercise. Often, the archaeologist has only a few clues. A similar name in local toponymy. An inscription fragment. A topographic alignment corresponding to a biblical description. These clues are precious but fragile. A name may have changed. An inscription may have been moved. A topography may have evolved. Biblical archaeology is therefore a field where uncertainty remains important. Identifications are hypotheses, proposals, never definitive proofs. This fragility is not a weakness. It is an invitation to humility, prudence, recognition of our limits. Chapter 3. Kings, Inscriptions and Contested Narratives. Biblical Kings. David, Solomon, Hezekiah. Their names resonate in collective memory. But what do the stones really tell us about them? Part 111. A reinterpreted stone fragment, Hezekiah's inscription. Near the Gihon Spring in Jerusalem, a stone fragment was discovered in 2007. For years, it remained mysterious. Only in 2022 did a new epigraphic analysis, conducted by Dr. Gershon Galil of the University of Haifa, propose a revolutionary reading. The inscription could be a funerary epitaph dedicated to King Hezekiah. It would mention his death, his reign, his achievements. If this interpretation is correct, it would be the first direct epigraphic mention of Hezekiah ever found in Jerusalem. This fragment shows how a simple stone, long neglected, can suddenly rewrite the history of a biblical king. Part 112. A stone that rewrites history. This Hezekiah fragment illustrates a fascinating phenomenon in biblical archaeology. Objects can sleep in museum reserves for decades. Then, thanks to new methods, a fresh look, they reveal unsuspected secrets. Multispectral imaging, photogrammetry, advanced linguistic analysis, these tools allow reading what seemed illegible. The Hezekiah fragment had been discovered but not understood. It took 15 years for someone to propose the right reading. This story reminds us that archaeology is a continuous process. Yesterday's discoveries can be reinterpreted tomorrow. Part 113. Beit Shemesh, a mysterious destruction. Beit Shemesh, a biblical city in the Judean foothills, revealed an archaeological enigma. Excavations led by Drs. V. Letterman showed the city was destroyed in early 8th century BCE. But this destruction corresponds to no known invasion in biblical or extra-biblical texts. The Assyrians had not yet arrived. The Philistines had already declined. Who then destroyed Beit Shemesh? This mysterious destruction reminds us that archaeology sometimes reveals events that texts have forgotten. Real history is always more complex than narratives. Part 114. Inscriptions on Hezekiah's hydraulic works. King Hezekiah is famous in the Bible for his major infrastructure projects, notably the tunnel bringing water from Gihon Spring to the Pool of Siloam. The Siloam inscription, discovered in the 19th century, describes the tunnel's construction. It tells how two teams of miners dug from both ends until meeting in the middle. Other, more fragmentary inscriptions have been found near hydraulic systems attributed to Hezekiah. These texts corroborate biblical accounts describing Hezekiah as a great builder who prepared Jerusalem to resist Assyrian siege. The hydraulic inscriptions show that Hezekiah was not only a religious king. He was also an engineer, a strategist, an urban planner. Part 115. Assyrian lists and biblical kings. Assyrian annals mention several biblical kings: Ahab, Jehu, Hezekiah, Manasseh. These mentions confirm the historicity of these figures. But often, the Assyrian account differs radically from the biblical account. For example, the Assyrians present their campaigns as crushing triumphs. The Bible sometimes insists on resistance or miraculous deliverance. These divergences are not necessarily contradictions. They simply reflect different perspectives, different propagandas. Assyrian lists remind us that each ancient text has its own agenda. The historian must navigate between multiple, sometimes contradictory narratives. Chapter 4. To write, judge and administer differently. Writing. Law. Administration. These pillars of any organized society. How did they function in the biblical world? Part 116. A long Greek papyrus from the Judean desert. In 2025, a reinterpretation of a Greek papyrus from the Judean desert caused a sensation. This 133-line text is the longest Greek papyrus ever found in this region. It describes a complex legal case in Roman Judea. The document reveals a very structured legal system. Lawyers plead. Witnesses are questioned. A judge renders a verdict. Long misclassified as Nabatean, this papyrus shows how many treasures can sleep in museum reserves, waiting for an attentive specialist to rediscover them. This papyrus reminds us that the world of Jesus was deeply legal, administrative, bureaucratic. Far from the romantic image of a simple pastoral society. Part 117, 133 lines revealing a structured legal system. These 133 lines of Greek are a treasure for historians of Roman law. They describe procedures, arguments, references to laws. They show how justice functioned daily. The document mentions properties, inheritances, debts. Very concrete, very human questions. It also reveals that Greek was the administrative lingua franca. Even in Judea, far from Hellenistic centers, Greek dominated the public sphere. This papyrus plunges us into the prosaic reality of Roman administration, far from great events, at the level of ordinary disputes. Part 118, a document misclassified for decades. The story of this papyrus illustrates a recurring problem in archaeology. Objects are misclassified, mislabeled, misunderstood. They remain in reserves, forgotten. Sometimes, an attentive, or lucky, researcher rediscovers these treasures. He proposes a new reading, a new interpretation. The papyrus had been classified as Nabatean when it is Greek. This error made it invisible to Greek specialists for years. This story reminds us that museums probably abound with discoveries not yet recognized. The archaeology of the future may be done as much in reserves as in the field. Part 119, the extension of Greek, a bilingual, even trilingual world. The world of Jesus was multilingual. Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, sometimes Latin were spoken. Aramaic was the daily language. Greek, the administrative and commercial language. Hebrew, the sacred language. Latin, the language of imperial power. This linguistic diversity complicated communication, but also facilitated exchanges, commerce, diplomacy. The extension of Greek shows how Hellenization profoundly marked the Near East, even in regions culturally resistant. The biblical world was not monolithic. It was a crossroads of languages, cultures, influences. Part 120, the Archives of Ebla, a sophisticated administration. Let us return to Ebla, which we have already discussed. The archives reveal an administration of astonishing sophistication. Detailed lists of royal employees. Contracts specifying each party's obligations. Diplomatic correspondence is formulated according to strict codes. Ebla already used cuneiform to regulate taxes, lands, disputes. A complete state management system. This bureaucracy prefigures that of later kingdoms, Assyrian, Babylonian, then Persian, Greek, Roman. The archives of Ebla show us that before the Bible, there already existed a Near East where writing regulated society. Administration is not a biblical invention. Chapter 5. Jesus, Jerusalem and a changing landscape. Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. A complex urban landscape. Recent work allows us to better understand the topography of the Holy City. Part 121. Completion of the Pool of Siloam excavation. In 2025, excavation work at the Pool of Siloam reached a new stage. This pool, mentioned in John's Gospel as the place where Jesus healed a man born blind, had been partially excavated since 2004. New work revealed the entire hydraulic system, the stairs, successive pools, supply channels. Dating confirms this pool dates to the 8th century BCE, built during the major works of the Judean monarchy, then reused in the 1st century. The Pool of Siloam allows us to better understand Jerusalem's topography in Jesus' time. Gospel sites become more concrete, more real. Part 122. An 8th century pool reused in the 1st century. The Pool of Siloam was not built for Jesus. It existed for nearly 900 years when he sent the blind man there. This long history illustrates an important phenomenon, the reuse of ancient infrastructure. Jerusalem's inhabitants in the 1st century used systems built by their distant ancestors, aqueducts, cisterns, pools. The Pool of Siloam, anchored in the major works of the Judean monarchy, had become a place of ritual purification in the 1st century. This continuity shows that the biblical past was not distant for Jesus' contemporaries. They lived amid the traces of their ancestors. Part 123. The Gibeah, Hezekiah's Tunnel, Siloam Connection. The Gibeah Spring, Jerusalem's only natural water source, was vital for the city. King Hezekiah had an underground tunnel of over 500 meters dug to bring water from Gibeah to the Pool of Siloam, inside the walls. Why? To prepare Jerusalem for Assyrian siege. Water had to be accessible even when surrounded. This system tells a story of military anxiety and water management. Jerusalem was vulnerable. Its survival depended on water. The Gibeah-Hezekiah-Siloam connection reminds us that great technical achievements often arise from fear. Human ingenuity responds to threat. Part 124. Recent work at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Holy Sepulchre, traditional site of crucifixion and resurrection, is subject to ongoing research. Recent work seeks to refine dating of structures and graffiti. Some graffiti seem to date to the 4th century, when Constantine built the first church here. Other markings could be even older, suggesting veneration of the site before official construction. This research is delicate. The site is sacred to millions. Work must be conducted with respect and care. The Holy Sepulchre remains a place where archaeology, faith, and memory intertwine inextricably. Part 125. An urban landscape denser than imagined. Modern research reconstructs an urban landscape around Golgotha denser and more complex than popular images. In the 1st century, this area was not an isolated rural place. It was an active urban periphery, with quarries, tombs, gardens. Excavations revealed remains of buildings, walls, roads. The site was both inside and outside the city, a liminal zone. This topographic complexity helps understand why this place was chosen for executions. Visible, accessible, but outside the walls. The urban landscape of Jerusalem in Jesus' time was richer, more varied than our simplified images. Archaeology complexifies our vision. Chapter 6. Manuscripts, AI, and Text in Mutation. Ancient manuscripts. These fragile witnesses of textual transmission. And now, artificial intelligence revolutionizes their study. Part 126. AI used to refine manuscript dating. Artificial intelligence programs comparable to Enoch are now used to refine dating and reading of Dead Sea Scrolls. AI can analyze letter shapes, compare thousands of samples, detect patterns invisible to the human eye. It can date a manuscript more precisely by analyzing paleographic evolution, how letters change over time. These tools do not replace human expertise. But they complement, refine, sometimes correct it. AI applied to manuscripts shows how modern technology can illuminate the most ancient past. Part 127. Distinguishing different scribal hands. AI allows distinguishing different scribal hands in the same scroll. A manuscript may have been copied by several scribes working in relay. Their writings are similar but subtly different. Traditional analysis struggled to identify these hand changes. AI, trained on thousands of examples, detects these nuances. These discoveries reveal more complex scriptoria than previously thought. Sacred text copying was organized, professional. Identification of scribal hands brings us closer to the individuals who transmitted biblical texts. AI humanizes the past. Part 128. Redactional layers revealed. New linguistic approaches, aided by computing, show redactional layers in biblical books. A text may have been written at one time, then modified, completed, reorganized at another. Each intervention leaves linguistic traces. Computational analysis can detect these differences in style, vocabulary, syntax. It helps chronologically situate different strata. Archaeology sometimes corroborates these analyses. A text mentioning a destroyed city cannot predate that destruction. Redactional layers show us the Bible is the result of a long, complex process. It did not fall from heaven complete. Part 129. Carbon-14 dating crossed with AI. Carbon-14 dating, crossed with AI analysis, challenges certain traditional manuscript datings. A manuscript long dated to the 2nd century BCE might actually be from the 1st century. This 100-year difference changes our understanding of textual transmission. AI analyzes parchment, ink, paleography. Carbon-14 dates organic matter. Together, these methods offer more reliable chronology. These revisions require rethinking the history of certain biblical texts. When were they copied? In what context? The carbon-14 AI combination represents the future of manuscript study. Science meets sacred text. Part 130. Plurality of textual versions. Chapter 7. Wars, Migrations and Destructions. The biblical world was a world of violence, of incessant wars, of forced migrations, of massive destructions. Part 131. An Assyrian military base near Jerusalem. Between 2018 and 2019, excavations at El-Araj, 5 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, revealed what appears to be an Assyrian military base. The rectangular structure, typical of Assyrian military camps, dates precisely to late 8th century BCE. Hundreds of Assyrian-style pottery shards, arrowheads, temporary fortification remains were discovered. This base was probably a rear support point during Sennacherib's siege of Jerusalem in 701 BCE. The discovery of this Assyrian base takes us back to that terrifying moment when Judah barely survived. The Assyrians were at the gates. Part 132. Assyrian fortifications showing military pressure. Other Assyrian fortifications have been identified near Jerusalem, showing constant military pressure on Judah in the 8th century. These structures testify to prolonged military occupation. The Assyrians did not just pass through. They settled, controlled territory. The fortifications also reveal Assyrian strategy: encircle, isolate, starve. Methodical, planned warfare. For Judah's inhabitants, living under this permanent threat must have been psychologically crushing. Assyrian fortifications remind us that biblical history unfolded in a context of imperial terror. Part 133. Assyrian Annals, a very different account. Assyrian Annals present Sennacherib's campaign as total success. They enumerate conquered cities, deported populations, tributes received. The Bible, however, insists on Jerusalem's miraculous deliverance. The angel of the Lord strikes the Assyrian camp, forcing Sennacherib to withdraw. Who tells the truth? Both, probably, each in their own way. Sennacherib did ravage Judah, but he did not take Jerusalem. This divergence shows how each side interprets the same events according to its own perspective. Assyrian annals and the Bible do not necessarily contradict. They offer different angles on complex reality. Part 134. Biblical Wars Without Clear Trace. Several wars mentioned in the Bible leave no clear archaeological trace. This does not mean they did not occur. Not all battles leave massive destructions. Some are simple skirmishes. But this reopens debate about the nature of certain accounts. Are they historical, symbolic, theological? The absence of archaeological proof requires caution. One can neither confirm nor refute certain events. These traceless wars remind us of archaeology's limits. The silence of stones is not always eloquent. Part 135. Israel as small rebel province. The great empires, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, appear as the true architects of the ancient Near East. Israel and Judah were small kingdoms, often vassals, sometimes rebellious, always vulnerable. This disinterred vision can shock. The Bible places Israel at the center of history. But archaeology replaces it in an imperial context. This perspective takes nothing from Israel's spiritual and cultural importance. But it recalls its political fragility. Israel as small rebel province invites us to reread biblical narratives with humility. The chosen people were also a dominated people. Chapter 8. Neighbors, Influences and Parallel Worlds. Israel was not alone. All around, flourishing civilizations. Rich cultures. Parallel traditions. Part 136. Canaanite and Aramean cities, similar cults. Canaanite and Aramean cities show cults, laws and myths very similar fundamentally to those the Bible combats. Canaanite deities, Baal, Astarte, El, are not so different in function from deities of other Near Eastern pantheons. Laws discovered in Canaanite archives strangely resemble biblical laws. Same structure, same concerns. This proximity is no accident. Israel shared the same cultural universe as its neighbors. Canaanite cities remind us the Bible combats cults it knows intimately. Biblical polemic is not against the unknown, but against the too familiar. Part 137. Ebla archives confirm a shared universe. Ebla archives confirm the Bible shares the same universe of city-states, treaties, and alliances as the rest of the Near East. Political structures, diplomatic formulas, contract types, all this is common to the entire region. Ebla shows Israel did not invent these forms. It inherited, adapted, transformed them. This cultural continuity takes nothing from Israel's originality. But it situates it in a broader context. Ebla archives invite us to see Israel not as total exception, but as creative variation on regional themes. Part 138. Discoveries outside Israel become indispensable. Archaeological discoveries outside Israel, in Syria, Jordan, Egypt, have become indispensable for understanding biblical context. Israel can no longer be studied in isolation. One must know Ugarit, Mari, Ebla, Amarna. These extra-biblical sites illuminate religious practices, political structures, literary traditions forming the Bible's background. Biblical archaeology has therefore necessarily become regional archaeology. Discoveries outside Israel remind us Israel was part of a larger world. To understand it, one must know this world. Part 139. Jewish diaspora documented outside the Bible. The phenomenon of Jewish diaspora in Egypt and elsewhere is documented by papyri and non-biblical inscriptions. The Elephantine papyri, for example, reveal a Jewish community in Egypt as early as the 5th century BCE. These Jews had their own temple, their own practices. They sent letters to Jerusalem, asking advice. The diaspora shows Israel overflowed its geographic borders. Jewish identity could exist far from the Promised Land. Diaspora documents remind us ancient Judaism was more dispersed, more diverse than often imagined. Part 140. Bronze Iron Continuities Despite Rupture Narratives. Settlement maps show strong continuities between Bronze Age and Iron Age, despite narratives of total rupture. The conquest of Canaan, as described in Joshua, suggests radical break. But archaeology shows rather demographic continuity. Same sites remain occupied. Same agricultural techniques persist. Same trade routes function. This continuity suggests Israel's emergence was perhaps more gradual, more internal than an external invasion. Bronze-iron continuities invite us to nuance rupture narratives. Real history is often more fluid than grand narratives. Chapter 9. Modern Methods and Battle of Narratives. Modern archaeology has extraordinary tools. But these tools also raise new questions, new debates. Part 141. Satellite Imagery and LiDAR Revolutionize Discoveries. Satellite imagery and LiDAR now identify settlement patterns invisible to traditional excavations. LiDAR can penetrate dense vegetation, revealing structures buried under jungle or forest. Satellite imagery detects color and vegetation variations, signaling potential archaeological sites. These technologies have enabled discovery of hundreds of new sites, changing our understanding of ancient settlement density. LiDAR and satellites remind us archaeology's future will not only be digging. It will also be from the sky. Part 142. Radiocarbon Dating Appending Chronologies. Systematic radiocarbon dating has appended old chronologies based almost solely on the Bible. Previously, sites were dated by referring to biblical events. Now we date scientifically, then compare with the Bible. This reversal has created tensions. Some scientific dates contradict traditional biblical chronologies. But these tensions are fruitful. They force rethinking, refining, nuancing. Radiocarbon dating reminds us science can correct our preconceptions. Humility is necessary. Part 143. Literary Approaches, the Bible as Narrative Construction. Literary approaches now read the Bible as a set of narrative constructions, not just as reporting. A biblical narrative can be historically based while being theologically oriented, literarily stylized. This approach is not a rejection of historicity. It is recognition of ancient texts' complexity. Archaeology dialogues with these literary approaches. Both disciplines enrich each other. Literary approaches invite us to read the Bible more subtly. History and theology do not necessarily oppose. Part 144. A Critical New Generation in Israel. A new generation of Israeli archaeologists criticizes overly harmonizing reconstructions between text and terrain. These researchers, trained in the most rigorous methods, refuse to bend archaeology to nationalist or religious demands. They insist on archaeology's independence. Stones speak their own language. This critical approach sometimes creates controversy. But it guarantees scientific integrity. The new generation reminds us archaeology must remain science, not propaganda tool. Part 145. Media simplify nuanced results. Media often simplify nuanced results into proof the Bible is wrong or the Bible is right. This binary is reductive. Reality is always more complex. A discovery can confirm one aspect of biblical narrative while questioning another. It is neither all true nor all false. Serious archaeologists hate these simplifications. But they attract clicks, views, attention. Media simplifications remind us of the responsibility to communicate science well. Nuance is difficult but necessary. Chapter 10. Epilogue, mystery maintained, questions open. And now, at the end of this journey through 50 facts, what have we learned? And above all, what have we understood of what we will never know? Part 146. Central questions remain unanswered. Despite all technical progress, central questions remain without clear answer: the Exodus, the conquest, the kingdom's grandeur, the exact locations of so many events. These mysteries are not archaeology's failures. They are rather proof of necessary humility. The past never fully yields. Evidence is fragmentary. Interpretations, multiple. This uncertainty is not comfortable. But it is honest. Unanswered questions remind us ancient history will always remain, in part, mysterious. Part 147. Archaeology can neither prove nor refute faith. Archaeology can neither prove nor refute theological dimensions of narratives, only illuminate their historical backgrounds. It can say if a city existed, if a battle occurred. But it cannot say if God was at work. This limit is not a defect. It is simply recognition that science and faith operate in different registers. Archaeology and faith can dialogue, enrich each other. But they do not merge. Archaeology reminds us faith does not rest on material proofs. That is precisely faith. Part 148. Many discoveries neglected then rediscovered. Many major discoveries were first neglected in reserves before being rediscovered by an attentive specialist. Objects sleep in museums, mislabeled, misunderstood. Then, years later, someone looks again. This dynamic of neglect then rediscovery is fascinating. It shows archaeology is never finished. Each generation must re-examine old finds with new eyes, new methods. Rediscoveries remind us archaeology's future may already be in our museums. Part 149. The Bible as Interpretation, Not Chronicle. Divergences between biblical texts and material data require thinking of the Bible as interpretation, not simple chronicle. A biblical narrative is not journalistic reporting. It is theological meditation on events. This distinction takes nothing from the Bible's value. On the contrary, it enriches our reading. Understanding the Bible as interpretation frees us from overly literal, overly rigid readings. The Bible as interpretation invites us to seek not the letter but the Spirit. Part 150. Mystery persists, not from lack of data but from richness. Biblical mystery persists not because there is no data, but because data speak a more nuanced language than slogans. We have more information than ever. But this information reveals complexity defying simple explanations. Mystery is not ignorance. It is awareness of depth, richness, inexhaustibility. Each archaeological discovery does not resolve mystery. It displaces, refines, makes it more precise. And perhaps this is how it should be. The sacred needs mystery to remain sacred. Archaeology does not destroy this mystery. It teaches us to inhabit it with more wisdom. May the echoes of history bring you peaceful dreams. Good night.